So the next topic is how do we pass parameters to a Java thread? And this turns out to be surprisingly subtle at first. Actually, once you understand what's going on, it's not hard at all. But at first, you're probably going to scratch your head and go, how would you pass a parameter to a thread? Well, as you can see, the run hook method, both in the runnable functional interface and as well as in the thread class, doesn't take any parameters. So it's not like a varargs list of things you pass in there. So that raises the question, doesn't beg the question, it raises the question of how you can pass parameters to a Java thread. And as often is the case, there's two different ways to do this stuff. One way is to pass parameters as the arguments to a class constructor. So we kind of saw this in the GCD runnable example we looked at before, where we extend random and implement runnable. And then we're going to have a field called main activity, or mActivity of type main activity, and we're going to have a constructor of the GC runnable class that takes the main activity and stashes it away. And then in the run hook method, you can see here, when we want to access the parameter that was passed, we are going to access the field of corresponding to the parameter that was passed and stashed away in the field via the constructor. So that way we can kind of customize the behavior of that object. Sort of obvious thing to do, right? And then when we run the code, you can see here we make ourselves a new GCD runnable, passing in this, and that will then go ahead and have a new thread that's associated with it, as we saw before. The second way to do parameter passing is to add arguments or parameters to setter methods. So that's the approach we did with GCD thread. So you can see here we have a couple of fields, mActivity, which is main activity, and mRandom, which is random. And then we have these setter methods, set activity, set random. You can see that they use the technique of storing the field from the parameter and then returning this, which is how they do the so-called fluent interface pattern. So you can chain things together, which is very cool. And then here's a simple example of this where we can customize the behavior by accessing those fields. So it's pretty much the same as before. We can do mActivity to get to the activity. We can do mRandom to get to the random number generator, which we passed in as those parameters to the setter methods. And then here's what it looks like when we run it. As you can see, new GCD thread, .setActivity, .setRandom, fluent interface, nice and concise. So that's the end of the quick overview of how to pass parameters to a Java thread. It's really kind of obvious, but it helps to understand this particular set of idioms, because otherwise you'll be left scratching your head as to how on earth you're going to get the actual values passed, because there's no parameters that are passed to the run hook method.